Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing show. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you're enjoying this show, please let us know. Leave us a rating and review. That way we can learn what you love about the show, get some feedback, and make it work even harder for you. And if this is your first time listening to the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, I've got a great episode. I've been trying to get this guy on the show for at least 2 years, all right? So I'm excited to finally get Nikolai Ray. Nikolai is the founder and CEO of MREX, as well as a professor in real estate financial engineering at MREX College. He's regarded as one of North America's leading experts in apartment investing with over $10 billion worth of analysis, underwriting, and transactions. Let's welcome to the show, Nikolai Ray.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Listen, it's fun to get you on. I know we've been trying to get this set up for a little while now. I heard you speak a couple years ago at another event and was really intrigued with what you had to say and excited to finally talk to you here today. So I went over your bio at a high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and give us a little bit more context on your background?
Well, my background is pretty, I'd say it's quite eclectic, and that's probably what makes me who I am and what I am today. So I'm a French Canadian born in Quebec City, of Bengali and British background, who grew up in the ghettos of Los Angeles. And essentially after that, I became a professional ice hockey player, a couple of years down the road as I came back to Canada, and had a very short professional ice hockey career. Then segued into human performance and preventive medicine. As I studied throughout my junior hockey career, I made sure that I kept going to school. So I studied at university in biomechanics and pre-med, and then essentially worked as the chief of human performance for the Canadian Olympic teams at 3 Olympic Games, and did a whole bunch of cool stuff in that area of human performance and preventive medicine and all that stuff. And essentially at the later stage of my 20s, decided to go full in real estate, as I was already, you could say, kind of like an amateurish kind of, desk real estate investor who really liked real estate investments and finance. And being from a biomechanics background, essentially I'm pretty much a math whiz. I was, doing probably like grade 12 math when I was 5 years old. And it might have to do with that Indian background as well. That helps quite a lot. All my uncles and great uncles were either like engineers and Nobel Prize laureates in physics and stuff like that. So you kind of grow up with that kind of math in your family. And decided that, late 20s, I had all this success in my athletic career and then in my professional career. I was like, as an entrepreneur, as a mathematician, I'd really like to take a dab at real estate, like seriously, really seriously, and went in hard. And in the last 10 years, essentially, in the first 3 years, built up a real estate investment bank, sold that within 3.5 years. Then I founded MREX and the MREX College. And I've also founded a value add and heavy value add and opportunistic private real estate vertically integrated company for myself and 2 of my buddies. So that's it in a couple minutes.
Man, I love it, man. You said it exactly right, because you talked about an eclectic background, and that's exactly what you just described, from, professional hockey player to getting into pre-med and what do you call it? Biomechanics and so many other things there, right? Finally to getting into real estate, mathematician, financial modeling, and the background itself. You talked about being a French Canadian who grew up in LA and, a little bit of Indian background too. I mean, there's a whole lot going on there, right? So certainly has allowed you to develop into kind of a well-rounded individual. For most of our conversation, I really want to talk about the way you look at numbers, the way you look at the modeling, and really what's the way of the future, because I think technology is such an important aspect of where we're going. And I know that that's been something that's been really key to you and just really being at the forefront of what's happening next. So let's start by talking about kind of what you're working on right now with MREX. Explain exactly what that is and how does that live in today's world?
Sure. Well, I mean, as I founded the real estate investment bank that I ran for 3.5 years, I kept on running into the same kind of problems consistently, where I was realizing that number one, accessing the market, even for people with money, is actually a pretty hard thing to do. Like putting capital to work, and this is back to say like 2013, 2014, right? So I mean, even if I had a client who had a couple $100,000 and wanted to buy a property, it's a lot of work to find a property because there's no real marketplace, right? There's stuff on Zillow and LoopNet and Crexi and 10X and MLS, and there's stuff kind of everywhere. Then you can prospect using like Rihanna and other tools, but there's no one centralized market. Number two, the data is very spotty at best, and the data that's out there, it's gotten a bit better over the years with some of the companies that I named a couple of minutes ago, but it's still very, it's unstructured. It's very kind of raw data. It's not what we call in the statistical world alternative data, meaning data that you can actually make decisions off of. Because the objective of data, the raison d'etre of data is so that you can make better decisions and be more strategic, right? So that was the second problem. The third problem I felt was that the education base out there for everyday real estate investors, and I worked at a very institutional level, family office, private equity. I've worked on all the levels, but for the average mom and pop investors, just for, people like me and you who just came up from kind of, from hustling and working hard and the level of knowledge for me is kind of missing. And now today there's some great coaching programs and mentorship programs, and there's some really good college and university programs in real estate, but there's still something kind of missing in the middle of that, meaning that, you need something that's kind of like college level of professionalism, but applied, right? And much more applied and specific to, say, multifamily. And the coaching and mentorship programs are great, but the knowledge base in those programs is very kind of, it just kind of stays on the surface because the objective there is to get you moving, to get in action, which is a great thing, but you're kind of missing a big gap there. And then finally, the fourth big thing for me was, growing up poor in some very, very tough neighborhoods with parents that didn't have much money, but who were I was luckily were there for me. My dad was, very present for me, contrary to all of my buddies whose dads were in jail. I realized that, it's very hard to access the real estate investment market. And when I talk about real estate investment, I talk about like multifamily specifically because it's such an awesome asset class because it has great returns. It doesn't have that much risk compared to, say, retail, office, the stock market, and other types. But it's so hard to get into it because unless you have $150,000, you really can't get your feet wet in it. And even if you do, you're not diversified. You're kind of like stuck putting it into all one basket. And I studied a lot on social movement of like how to essentially have social mobility within a society. And two things came up, and they studied the favelas in Brazil, which are, essentially like the kind of like the extreme version of like a ghetto or like a shanty town, essentially. And what they realized is that two things help people finally climb the social ladder, no matter where they came from. And it was education, so access to education, and access to ownership of property, right? The minute they allowed for people living in these favelas, who essentially had been living in the same place for many generations, like different like families of many generations, the minute they finally allowed them to become owners of their property instead of the state being owners of their property, for the first time, you actually saw like an increase in the amount of people being able to like climb themselves out of those tough environments and make a better life for themselves, which is the basis of the American dream, right? I mean, that's why everyone comes to America. So for me, those four things were like, those are four kind of problems I felt like I could attack, using what I'm doing now with the MREX College, which really attacks kind of like the education base that I talked about. And then MREX itself, which stands for Multifamily Real Estate Exchange, is essentially building at first an application, a mobile app that serves kind of like a Bloomberg terminal, but for everyday investors, and then eventually build like a kind of a NASDAQ or a Robinhood stock market for people who want to invest in real estate, but more of like in a stock format.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I love what you talked about as far as the ability to really understand the importance of ownership, right? And being able to change your situation. You talked about your upbringing and just the challenges that you saw with other people you grew up with. And you're right. I mean, that's one of the real reasons people look at real estate is we know it is a wealth generator, right? It's a wealth driver. Unfortunately, many people cannot access it due to the high barrier of entry. And even folks who have the means, there's an education gap where trying to jump into it, but you really don't know, or you've only listened to a couple podcasts, or you've read a couple, a book or two or an article. It doesn't put you in a position to feel comfortable pulling a trigger on a six-figure investment. So there certainly is some gap there, and it makes sense why you created a platform to help address that. Now, with you talked about your vision for MREX, right? And you talked about right now being kind of a Bloomberg-like approach and eventually becoming kind of a NASDAQ type of platform. Those are pretty ambitious, alternatives there that you're talking about. When it comes to where you're at today, maybe you give us a little more context to what MREX looks like in its current form and how investors like myself and others listening can actually use MREX.
So essentially, I mean, and that's a great point. They're very, very, very ambitious, and that I'm ready to put 25 years into this. Like I'm not building stuff for tomorrow morning, and I have the luck and the gratitude to have also already built quite a life for myself that puts me in a position to be able to take my time and do that and attack very ambitious stuff. Like I'm not in that phase of life anymore where like I'm trying to get by. Like I've gotten through that quite a while ago. So essentially, MREX College, I founded it in Montreal 5 years ago, and in the province of Quebec, which is essentially for Americans, a province is just the Canadian version of a state. In the state of Quebec, which is only 8 million people. Like I mean, the Tri-City area of Miami is essentially 9.5 million. We've already had 5,000 multifamily investors come through our doors and go through our programs. And the level of education that we've brought to them has just been absolutely, mind blowing. And so that's really a cool thing. Now we're at the point where we're opening up, we're translating everything to English. Well, where I'm building a lot of the stuff in English. It's just a matter of translating because I've worked both in the US and Canada on deals. So we're bringing it to English. Hopefully it'll all be available for people in English Canada and the US by the end of this year. And as for for MREX, for the technology company, we're in a beta phase right now. So there are actually investors right now on our platform who are accessing, all the things I've been talking about with regards to a centralized marketplace, to data, to actual insights. So it's still a long way to go. Still quite a lot of work. I've pretty much self-funded everything. No venture capital, no angel investors. I still control both companies. And, like I said, I'm in it for the long run. So I think real estate's a marathon. I think life's a marathon, and entrepreneurship is too. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
No, I love it. And if anyone wants to get more information, it's mrex.com, or where do they go to check that out?
mrex.co, actually. And
.co.
Yep. And by the time this actually airs, our new website will finally be online. So it'll be perfect.
Excellent. All right. mrex.co. Check it out there if you want to learn more. Hey, I want to talk more about kind of the future, right? You mentioned kind of the NASDAQ for real estate and just recognizing some of the gaps, the inefficiencies, the data that's out there. And you're right. I mean, anytime you're out there trying to figure out what properties are available or just trying to understand rents or whatever the case may be, you got to go through multiple sources, right, to try to pull together a story. And it's very inefficient. Right. As you look at streamlining that process, understanding how to tap into technology and make things a little bit better, where else do you see some of these inefficiencies where you expect to see some disruption over the next, say, 5 years?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really great way of putting it. And I think essentially education, data, and technology are the future of everything that we're doing, right? I think like what we're attacking is a huge, huge problem. Another problem I see also is in the brokerage community, like real estate agents. I own an investment bank, so we had actual brokers. We were doing some brokerage too. So I have I have a couple $100 million worth of experience in brokering actual multifamily properties. And I think the brokerage industry is quite broken, actually. And I think it'll probably be, I think something's going to change because, the fact of the matter is that real estate agents essentially existed at first to list properties, right? But now with the internet, do you really need someone to list your property? Like, seriously. And half the time when you look at all these listings, they're not even like, I was looking at a listing this morning. It was like an $8 million deal. There was like no information on the listing. That broker is being paid 3.5% of $8 million and has not even done the basic work to properly input the description of the property. Like it's pathetic. Like seriously. So I think, and I'm pro brokerage. Like I think brokers are important. I think they're very high quality brokers, but I think 95% of them are redundant and useless. So probably what's going to happen, as I see it, is eventually someone's going to wake up. And well, a couple of companies tried to, like Redfin and I think Compass, but they all ended up falling into the money trap where they're like, let's stop disrupting and just become brokers and make all that commission money, right? But I think someone eventually, someone like me who's not driven by money and who has the financial independence to do what the hell he wants to do or she wants to do and not care about that, will probably eventually disrupt the brokerage industry because 90% of what a broker does can essentially be replaced by technology, automation, process automation of like due diligence and getting, from that signed LOI all the way to actually, closing on the property. Like a lot of that can really be automated using technology, using like a transaction vault and stuff like that. So I think that's probably an industry where things are going to change. I think also the management side of a property, we're seeing a lot of stuff like smart technology, like Internet of Things, with like intelligent keys and locks. And, I kind of see the future of an apartment building of like, you don't even have to have someone actually working on the property anymore, managing tenants, where you'd have like an iPad with a robo advisor who'd essentially be like your concierge, right? So I think those are probably two other ways that I think the real estate industry is going to be disrupted on top of what I talked about is already like education, data, centralization, and also just opening up access to everyone, kind of in a Robin Hood kind of way.
Yeah, I think as you talked about process, right, especially when it comes to the brokerage side, there are a lot of things there that, can certainly be streamlined in that process. And
Sure.
one thing that I think about is always like the title process.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious to see what happens to title companies over the next 5-10 years, because, a lot of that stuff they do, there certainly could be a more efficient way of thinking of it. As we look at blockchain technology in particular, that's one of the real applications I see to disrupt the home buying process, the real estate process right now. But let's talk more about blockchain. And I know you're a little bit into crypto and things like that as well. But as you look at blockchain, how do you see that playing a role? Where do you see blockchain kind of fitting in, and what's the future when it comes to real estate investing?
I think blockchain will essentially just, become an underlying technology of everything that we do, especially in real estate. Because the way I look at it is I compare, especially with for non-technical people who don't have, a big technology background. I think blockchain, the easiest way to understand it is it's kind of like, it's like cloud computing. Like, does anyone really talk about cloud computing anymore? Like the only people who do are like our grandparents. No one really talks about the cloud. Like you don't say, oh, I'm going to put it in the cloud for you to get it. Like you'll put it in a Google Drive or a Dropbox or something like that. But you're not going to say, I'm going to go into cloud, right? Or you don't say, I'm going to sign up to this SaaS. Say, I'm going to sign up to Salesforce or HubSpot. And it's do you want the cloud version or the PC version? Like, of course it's on the cloud. Like everything's on the cloud pretty much. The days of putting in a floppy disk and uploading a program onto your computer, I mean, that's gone. So I think blockchain is essentially the same thing with regards to the transfer of value, right? Because the cloud kind of serves as transfer of information, which is like the first step of the internet. And the second step, I see it as more of how can now we transfer value in a more efficient way, through crypto, which is one of the, applications of blockchain. That's just one application. I think you talked about the title process. I think the whole, LOI, due diligence, title process. Now, if all of that is kind of on the blockchain or on a blockchain, it becomes much easier to manage that whole process. And it also makes a lot of the actors in it redundant or partially redundant. So you might arrive at a point where maybe the broker and the title agent might actually become one person. That might actually be a profession that ends up fusing together, which might not be a bad thing. It might make the brokers a bit more objective rather than being so subjective, because I think brokers eventually their job will be to be expert advisors and not, salespeople. So I think that's kind of the way I see blockchain. And, I think blockchain will just bring more transparency and get rid of a lot of the kind of that layer of fat that's there in the industry of just, people that are making big bucks or things that are costing a lot of money when they really shouldn't cost that much, or you don't need that many people in the process.
Yeah, and I think too, like just that history, right? The trail. One of the things that always is concerning to me or curious to me is that, anytime you buy a property, you've got to get a survey done. It's like, well, didn't the last guy do a survey? Like,
exactly.
Isn't there a track record of all this stuff somewhere? Like shouldn't this
really have to
with
go
the property? So it's just things like that I always find interesting, as well as like when you look at, the permitting process and all sorts of things like that, where if you could centralize that information and have it available, it just seems like it would be a much easier process than what many of us investors have to go through today.
Like when you're closing on a property, like, I always get, it's always funny because like closing agents, and here in the province of Quebec, we use what we call notaries, which are essentially kind of like a hybrid lawyer kind of title closing agent. And it's funny because whenever I close on properties, they call me like, "Hey, we got a box for you." I'm like, "Send it to my assistant. I don't want that. I don't want that box of all those documents and stuff like that. Like, can you not like just send me like a key of like a vault with everything on the blockchain on it? Like, how cool would that be?" And it just, I think, make things so much easier. And it would also allow for like maybe less, in a transaction, for example. I mean, I've acquired 35 properties in the last year and a half, like 35 apartment buildings. Just the back and forth of like emails and copies of emails and documents and blah blah blah. Just like eventually you're just like, oh my god, I'm there's just stuff everywhere. And then you're looking for something, you can't find it, and then your Gmail's not properly set up, and you lose the thread. And it's just, when you think about it, it's so inefficient the way that we work at the moment in real estate investing.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of that, I mean, as you look forward, obviously a lot has changed over the last year or two. As you kind of look forward, what are you looking at from an investing standpoint? You mentioned that you bought 35 properties.
Yep.
Sounds like you're still in acquisition mode. How has your criteria shifted or changed over the last year?
I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that it shifted or changed, actually, because I'd been on the sidelines. Essentially, I started investing passively when I was like 18. So up until 2 years ago, I had always kind of been more like a passive, like really small time passive investor. And obviously I was a real estate investment professional. So, I was busy, doing 14-hour days, transacting on, tens and hundreds of properties a year. So I didn't have much time myself to invest. And then like the last 2.5 years, just kind of alignment of stars have allowed me to say, okay, now I have a bit of time to do this, and a couple of buddies who want to do with me. So we have a very peculiar strategy where I'm applying a monopoly effect on my investments. So essentially what I've done is I started by determining which market I wanted to be in. And, this is how I used to work with family offices and private equity firms and syndicators is, number one, determine what market you want to be in or what markets you want to be in. And then in that market, where do you really want to focus on? Like, what's the sub-market of the market? Like, you want to be in the downtown core area. You want to be in that suburb, whatever. You want to be maybe on a secondary kind of, town that's not that far off from that bigger city. And then, so what we've done is we've essentially decided to go into a college city, which is a secondary market here. So it's about an hour south of Montreal. Montreal, obviously being, around a 4 million population. This city is more around like the 300,000 people. So it's pretty small, but not too small. There are 2 universities, 2 colleges, one of the biggest hospital research centers in the province. So what we've done is when I looked at the city, I was like, okay, this place has really cool demographics. And it's very blue ocean because everyone's in Montreal, cap rates are compressing. Everyone's in Toronto, Ottawa, Boston's not that far from here. Even Burlington, Vermont, which is like 40 minutes from here, is, just on fire. So I wanted to go I'm a kind of a blue ocean strategy guy, go where, there are less big sharks in the waters, less blood. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to look at like a secondary market. And I want a secondary market where there's strong population growth and where rents are pretty low compared to median salaries and revenues. So medium income. So I found this city, Sherbrooke it's called. And as I looked at it, I was looking at like the subsectors of it. I realized, on top of like the macro of that area being really interesting for me as an investor, I looked at the downtown area, which was just like awful, like horrible. It reminded me of like the downtown of LA, like in the 80s, like when I grew up in LA. Skid Row, and like you didn't want to go downtown. And now LA today is awesome. Like there's like that LA Live area of downtown LA, which is just, really cool place. And usually I like studying how cities grow and architecture and urban planning. And usually the way a city functions is that the core downtown area is usually very eclectic, but there's quite a lot of money down there. And then you kind of have like an area around that, which is obviously, lower income, a bit more poor. And then around that, you end up in the suburbs. And then there's obviously, medium income, families and households, and a couple of, maybe poorer suburbs here and there. Now in this city, the poorest area by far was the downtown area. And there's no so the way the city's structured is kind of it's kind of out of whack with regards to how usually cities live and breathe and exist. So for me, that was kind of an anomaly. So I said, okay, let's try and profit off of this. So what we did was say, okay, let's go and invest in the downtown area when no one really wants to invest there. So using a very contrarian approach. But then on top of the contrarian approach, I just came in with the heat. Like I just put in huge firepower because I essentially bought 35 properties in a 1 mile radius in 15 months. And all very, very heavy value add stuff or opportunistic stuff. So as people are like, what are you doing buying there? Like, that's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. And they're like, aren't you worried the market's not going to go up? And I'm like, yes, because in any contrarian approach, that's the risk, right? But I'm controlling that risk. And that's, my financial engineering background is all about, maximizing returns and mitigating risk. I've essentially mitigated that risk by buying so many properties and redeveloping all of them that the market doesn't have a choice. I'm making it a better market, essentially. So that's kind of the monopoly effect that I've been using. I must say COVID has made things a bit harder because, a lot of delays because we've had to close, projects for a couple weeks here and there as lockdown happened. Right now, like getting access to workers and materials it's a real pain. Like that's probably the biggest thing that COVID has made me change, but I'm buying more and more and more and more.
I love it, man. Listen, that monopoly effect, as you called it, is a smart way. If you're going to go into a rough area or an area that needs a lot of work, buying as many properties as you can, and you effectively being the change agent, you effectively creating the path of progress, not waiting for it, but creating it. It's a great strategy. Now, certainly got to be well capitalized to do that, but I think that's a smart strategy.
And you also have to be. I think you can't take that approach if you only have dollar bills in your mind, right? You have to have. So I'm a very, growing up poor and growing up in poor neighborhoods, I'm very sensitive also to people living in these neighborhoods. I'm not going in there to just try to gentrify everything and kick everyone out. So some projects we're doing like affordable housing. We're working with the community groups. We're working with everyone in there to make sure that there's a nice, a nice mix, and that there's actually a creation of community and not just us, renovating all these properties and building these new properties and just pretty much kicking everyone out. Because I think you don't want to lose that spirit or that soul as well of a neighborhood. Because I think even though the neighborhood is, sometimes neighborhoods can kind of like end up in a very bad kind of situation. Every neighborhood has a soul, and you want to kind of not lose that soul. You just want to kind of, revitalize the neighborhood, bring back some pride.
Man, I love that. You mentioned about revitalization. You also mentioned that you're not really focused on gentrification. How would you describe the difference between those two words, gentrification versus revitalization?
I'm so happy you asked me that question. That's an awesome question. The way I see it is that, so gentrification for me is, let's say you enter a neighborhood, a poor neighborhood, you knock everything down, you build all new stuff, all high-end stuff. And then all the poor people and the lower income people, where they go? They got to leave. It's essentially they got to just leave, and you've gentrified the area. Revitalization is, number one, a consideration of community. So what you do is, number one, the worst properties that the previous owners didn't maintain, well, you're going to bring them back up to a livable and acceptable kind of level, or rebuild them entirely. And some properties you'll have to knock down, so you might rebuild them new. That doesn't mean they always have to be high-end stuff. You can build, medium-end stuff. You can build affordable stuff. There's there's tax credits. There's financing. Like even the U.S. with HUD, you can get some really interesting financing. Up here in Canada, you have the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, which is essentially the same thing as HUD and Fannie Freddie. That allows you to have really cool financing if you do affordable housing projects. So I think those two things, and also understanding that for me, gentrification is also much more of, let's say average rents in a market are $700 for a 2-bedroom, and you buy all these properties that have like $600 to $700 to $800 rents. You upgrade them all up to $1,000, $1,200, $1,500. That's gentrification. If you're buying apartment buildings that are essentially not even safe to live in, and that people are paying like $350 a month to live in them, and then these people should actually be, in specialized homes and whatnot, and you're rebuilding these properties at, say, the $700, $800, $900 level, you're not really gentrifying. You're revitalizing, and you're just, you're kind of, and this is not politically correct, but you're cutting out the tumors and the cancers. Not that all those people are bad people, but they shouldn't be there. And there are other places where they should be. And it's a very hard thing to do, because then, sometimes you don't know where to send these people. And that's why we're also trying to work on our vertical integration of actually building homes for, drug addicts to help them, break the habit, and people with, mental health issues and stuff like that. So that's where revitalization comes into play as a developer, where you're thinking about all of those things and you're trying to redevelop kind of all of those aspects.
Yeah, I think the takeaway from what you said is that it's more about revitalizing the soul of that community, not displacing the residents.
Right.
Certainly,
Right.
some people may need to live somewhere else, but that's less about their ability to afford the rent and more
Right.
about their mental state, their health
Right.
issues, things
Right.
like that. So,
Absolutely.
great point of clarification there. This has been a lot of great information, man. I really enjoyed talking to you about technology, what you've got going on with MREX, how you're, acquiring all these properties right now and revitalizing these communities. I want to move on to our bullseye round, but before you do, I have to give your website. So if you want to learn more about what Nikolai has going on, you can check him out at mrex.co, mrex.co. Now to our bullseye round. Give me an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
Oh, that's easy. I went bankrupt when I was 26. So when I was 22, I stopped playing professional hockey, and pretty much just started a company in high performance and human performance and health. And that built up to like a 75-person company, built a second company next to that, a hockey player agency where we take care of contracts and stuff like that. And the growth just got so crazy, and I took on a really bad business partner, and I wasn't equipped to deal with all of it. It ended up actually, because I'd co-signed on absolutely everything, I was the guarantor on everything. I ended up going bankrupt because of that. So, I went from being essentially poor to a millionaire by 25 to homeless at 26. I was homeless for 3 months. And the 11 years, 12 years since then, skyrocketed once again. And I wouldn't be where I am today and the person I am if it wasn't for that.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Slack and Monday.com for sure. Two great tools.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
The Untethered Soul.
All right, give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Daily habit that helps me stay focused on my goals. I'd say kissing my kids every morning. Like every morning and every night, I always watch on them and give them a kiss. And just, I take a couple seconds just to look at them. And it reminds me that, that essentially reminds me that I have to be the best that I can be.
What are you curious about right now?
Definitely crypto. I'd say I'm very, very curious about crypto. And just the economy in general, like just the modern monetary theory and the kind of big experiment that we're living through quantitative easing and all these extreme politics. That's definitely what I'm very curious about.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
That growth is managing managing a company that's scaling and growing exponentially is much harder than starting a company. I wish I would have known that a while ago.
All right, you are based in Montreal, and I'm curious, give me the best place to grab a bite to eat in Montreal.
Ooh, that's a tough one. There's so many great places. I'd say probably La Queue de Cheval, the horse's tail, best steakhouse in town.
All right, you're gonna have to say that again because I have no idea how to spell it.
Queue de Cheval, the horse's tail. Yeah.
All right. I took French for like 10 years. And
really? Nice.
I'm still going to struggle right now and out. So luckily the team will help me out, but we'll figure that one out. Listen, this has been a lot of fun, man. I really enjoyed talking to you, as I knew I would. And I love what you're building with MREX. And I look forward to seeing the current iteration, the next iteration of it, and just your vision for this thing coming to light and coming to fruition. Again, that website is mrex.co if you want to check that out. And Nikolai, we hope to have you back on again soon and talk to you. Take care, man.
It'll be my pleasure. Anytime. Thanks a lot.